yes.
It literally said yes. There's like 6 positive pregnancy tests. And I was like, Like, I was excited.
You gave me a big hug.
I gave you a big hug. I was very excited. But at the same time, it just, because it had been so long, it was just weird. It wasn't as happy as it maybe should have been.
Welcome back to the Eternal Companions podcast. We're your hosts, Scott and Sarah.
On this podcast, we share the secret to developing and maintaining a long-lasting and fulfilling relationship.
On today's episode, we are going to be talking about kind of a heavy topic. Let's start with a trigger warning. This episode is going to be about fertility, pregnancy, miscarriage, and that's a good summary. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about our fertility and infertility journey as a couple. And yeah, where do you want to start, Scott?
Well, I think I want to ask you first, when did you realize or decide that you wanted to have kids?
That's a really interesting question because I think I have a different answer than most women. Because growing up, I was not raised in a household where motherhood was like really promoted. That sounds kind of weird, but like I remember my friends all had like baby dolls and stuff like that, and I wasn't allowed to play with baby dolls, you know, and it was never like, when you grow up, you're going to be a mom. Like my parents never really talked about that. And it wasn't even like they said you could be a mom if you wanted to. It just wasn't ever a thing that was really instilled in me. Instead, it was much more like career focused. Like when you grow up, you're going to have a job or things like that.
Bummer.
So yeah, right. So I didn't really have a desire to have kids when I was young. Throughout my high school years, I also didn't really think about having children. And I honestly, like once I became an adult, I knew it was probably going to be part of my life, but I didn't have like a really significant desire to have kids until we got married. Like when we were engaged and dating and everything, I was like, yeah, we're going to have kids someday. But it wasn't until I had such a close relationship with you that I was like, oh, I want to create life with this person, and I want to have somebody who's like half of Scott running around, you know? So it was really late for me. I was probably 20 really late. I'm 20 when I decided that I wanted to have kids, or I'd ever wanted to be a mom. So what about you?
Well, from a young age, becoming a parent was a big thing, and you know, from what my parents taught, right? Grow up, get married, have kids, have a family was an important thing as well, at home and at church. Right? Having children. And so it was always like a given that it would happen. But there were several experiences growing up that made me want to have kids.
Like what?
Like when I was probably 13, 14, and I was lifeguarding, I would help out and help teach the like swim classes and swim lessons. And it was really fun with like toddlers, like 3 and 4-year-olds.
That's so cute.
Super fun class.
Yeah.
That was really fun. And I thought, oh, kids are fun. I also really wanted to have kids when I was a math tutor. I had some of my best friends were like 7 years old. And I was a senior in high school.
Yeah.
And they were so funny and so much fun to also like help and teach. And yeah, those are some big ones. Even as a missionary, this is kind of weird, but as a missionary, you sometimes train new missionaries.
Right.
And I did that a couple times. This new missionary is coming from Utah to Thailand. Yeah, there was, let's see, 2 from Utah and 1 from New Zealand.
Shocking.
And that was fun
You got to be their dad.
introduce them to a new world.
Yeah.
Right. And to say, hey, these are my favorite snacks.
That's interesting. I kind of did have a similar experience when I was coaching. Like I also have enjoyed being a role model to younger people and teaching, but I never thought of it in that way of like, this is a parenting principle. That probably says a lot about me. Teaching is not a parenting principle. But yeah, I can definitely see how those experiences would make you interested in having kids. So that's cool.
Kids are fun. And that's when, we decide as individuals. Do you remember if early on, did we have a conversation about, like, do you want kids? Did we ask that to each other?
I honestly don't think we ever said that. And correct me if I'm wrong here, I feel like it was always a given that we would have kids. I remember when we were engaged, we did have a discussion of like birth control, and if I should get on a birth control that is a little bit more like long lasting. I remember we had a conversation about an IUD, and they had like a 3-year one or a 5-year one. And I remember we said like, let's do the 3-year one, and then we can kind of decide at that point if we want to get another one or take it out. So I think that's what I remember.
We definitely had some more in-depth conversations when we were engaged and married.
Right.
I assume we probably had spoken about having kids.
I think casually, just like when we have kids, like,
like that. And there wasn't a very clear person who was opposed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it should be a question that you ask.
Yeah. Especially if you don't know somebody.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like, I guess you should know somebody who you're marrying, but what I mean by that is you and I grew up together. And so I always saw that you wanted kids, or like you had been mentioning like someday I'll be a dad, whatever, since you were like 13, 14. So I never had to ask you, do you want kids? But if you're getting into a relationship for the first time with somebody as an adult, that's a pretty clear question.
Oh yeah.
That you should
definitely
get to
maybe not
early
first
on.
date.
No, maybe third. Just kidding. But it should be something that you talk about before you make a long-term commitment, because that's a huge deal.
It is.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I remember about in terms of just logistical planning. I knew that when we
about birth control.
Yeah, when we got married, we kind of had this idea that we wouldn't be having kids for at least a couple years.
If I remember correctly, my memory is telling me that we decided that we should probably wait to have kids until we're both out of college.
Yes. So let's give a little bit of context. We shared our like love story, marriage story.
If you haven't listened to it, episode 1.
Yes.
And there's a part 2 is one of
Sometime.
the episodes.
Yeah, I think the one last week, I think, was part 2. We didn't necessarily talk about the fact that we were both still in college when we did get married. I don't think.
Yeah.
So we got married, and I had 1 semester left of my undergrad, and Scott had
4 semesters,
I think so. I think 4, maybe 5 semesters left when we got married. I think 4. So we determined that it would be most responsible. Go ahead.
No, that can't be right.
Why?
I only went to 1 semester before.
And then 1 semester before your mission.
One semester
when
we
you
got
home.
engaged during that semester, and then that means 6 more.
Okay, so Scott had 6 semesters
3 years.
left. He had 3 years left of school. I only had 1 semester left.
Oh.
Yeah, it was rough. And so we determined it would be most responsible to wait to have kids until we were both done with school and we both had jobs, because kids are expensive.
Yeah.
You know?
But what actually happened,
This has been something that's happened in our marriage several times, where we come to an agreement on a timeline of some sort, and then we both individually receive a prompting from what we believe is God. Mm-hmm. That is like
definitely was.
Yeah. To be like,
I'm confident.
I'm just, giving context. we get a prompting that's like, maybe you should rethink this timeline. And so I remember came together and said like, hey, I've been thinking maybe we should start talking about kids. And you're like, oh my gosh, I actually was thinking that same thing. And we were like, this doesn't make any sense though. So
yeah, was I in my last semester of college?
no, it was 2021 when I got my IUD out. You graduated in 2022.
Did I?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
You were in school for my whole life. That's what it feels
Yeah.
like.
It was 2021.
Yeah. So I remember we were kind of confused.
You know what?
What?
Well, this was, my interpretation was you went off of birth control.
Yes.
And weaned off of
Like antidepressants.
antidepressants. But then there was a time period that we weren't trying to have a kid very actively, but we were also not preventing a
Right.
child. We weren't using birth control.
Right. And so before that though,
I skipped ahead.
you're skipping. Before that, I remember we were confused about the timing of everything. So we went to the temple.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? And we both were like, went to the temple with the hope of pondering the timeline of having children. And I remember I looked at you afterwards and I was like, what do you think? And you're like, I guess we're supposed to have a kid.
I was still confused a bit. I had some thoughts that were like, you should start,
Yeah.
but you might not have kids. Or
And-
I had some thoughts like,
Yeah.
you might end up adopting.
I remember that because, and that was a really strange thought to have, but we were like, okay, like what, that's cool too. Like, you know, we're happy to invite any children into our home. That sounds weird, but, but you know what I mean? Like we would be happy to become parents in any way.
Yeah.
So, but we determined that we needed to start the process. So starting the process for us looked like me getting rid of my freaking IUD, which I hated anyway. Thank goodness I got that thing out. Anyway, that was in April of 2021. And then like Scott mentioned, we had a period of time where I was trying to like let my body regulate and I was getting off of not birth control. I was off birth control. I was getting off of antidepressants.
Yeah. Which
And
was quick. Like it didn't
Yeah.
take that long, a month or two. It was
Right.
really the process.
right. And so then by that summer, by June is when we started like actively trying. And what did that look like? This is like a weird conversation because you hear people say like, oh, we're trying to have kids. And you think that just means you're having sex. Okay. Like that's not what this whole episode is about.
Right. Our actively trying was a science.
It was extremely scientific.
There were ovulation tests pretty much daily to track when you were ovulating. And then there was, 2 days before ovulation, 1 day before ovulating, the day after ovulating, the specific days and times to have sex to give the highest chances of conception.
Right. And I wasn't expecting that because like when I thought about having kids, I always heard from everybody like, oh, it just happened. Like,
Yeah.
especially because we were like in our early 20s.
Yeah, we should have been theoretically very fertile.
Right. We weren't. That's the quick version of this story. But I think the reason why we started doing the ovulation tests and everything like that was because my cycle was really messed up after I got my IUD out. I don't
Right.
think that we just like went into it saying like we're going to do the ovulation test. I think that we were really confused about my cycle,
Yeah.
which is why we started it. And then we realized like I'm ovulating at really weird times and like nothing was consistent. So that's
And
when we continued to do those
It also,
tests.
unsuccessful after several months.
Right.
It's like, well, we better use the tests now. We better make this a science.
Right. So
And
how long did this testing and everything go on for?
a year.
A year. We did not get pregnant until the following June.
Yeah.
And let's talk
And,
about that.
Well, during that time also, there was a whole we joined the community essentially of trying to conceive, where there's all sorts of people who are taking videos of ovulation tests
Me
and pregnancy
included
tests
at this point.
and putting them online and asking people, hey, do you see a line?
Oh my gosh.
There's a lot, and you can take the image and you put it into negative and you adjust the contrast to see if there's a
Hopefully
line.
see a line. Like,
Make a line appear.
you get so crazy after a while. And like, so we were in this community of people who were like us trying to conceive. And there's people in different stages of that. Some people are doing IVF. Some people are doing IUI. And it's like, I didn't know what any of these things even meant. And then there's all this lingo of like, how many days past ovulation are you? How, like all of this stuff. And so we have this going on running in the background of our every waking thought for a year. Essentially,
My last year of college.
your last year of college, which was it was very confusing to decide to start trying when you were still in school and I was the only one working. It didn't make any sense. But looking back, it took a whole year for us to get pregnant, and I'm glad that we started trying when we did.
I have a quote that kind of helped me decide or, was part of that prompting from God.
Do you want to share?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
So this was Jeffrey R. Holland
Okay.
who said this, and it was his story. It's not like a special quote, but he was just reciting him. It says, Sister Holland and I,
That's his wife,
wanted children as soon as we could get them, which in our case did not turn out to be as easy as we thought. It took us 3 years to have our first child, another 3 to get a second, and 4 to get a third. And then that was it. A full-term miscarriage for a 4th closed that door to us forever.
Oh.
So we have rejoiced in the 3 children we have been able to raise. But what would our lives have been like if we had waited or delayed or worried unduly about the economics of it all?
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So
yeah, I came across that quote right about the time we were deciding to fully try to have a child. And I thought to myself, oh boy, I thought, uh-oh, if this means that it's going to take a while for us, that's sad.
yeah. And then what ended up happening took a while for us. So during that whole time, we were surrounded by young families
And babies.
and we would go to Disneyland together, and I would look at the other families with their kids, and I'd be at the quote happiest place on earth being miserable, like a deep sorrow that I usually don't have. It did not help that I also was off of antidepressants because I was really trying to like do everything I could to make my body work. And like, it was really frustrating too that entire year because like I said, I didn't grow up thinking I necessarily wanted kids. Like being a mom was never part of my identity. And then when I like tried to have kids and I couldn't, I just felt like I was faking it. Like I was trying to force this identity of motherhood on myself. And I so many times thought like, maybe I'm just not meant to be a mom.
That's a sad, hard thought.
It is.
And
like,
you don't know if it's true or not.
That's the hardest part is I was just like sitting with this thought and I'm like, there's nothing I can do about it except try to have a kid.
It was tough too in our religious environment.
Oh my gosh.
There's expectations of having children and having children quick, which we had, first of all, we had already waited, I would say longer than the norm.
Oh yeah. So many people in our religious community get married and then 2 months later you see a Facebook post saying that they're having a honeymoon baby.
Yeah.
You know?
And so we had already waited, and then now we were trying, and we wanted a child very badly because we had wanted kids the whole time, but we waited so that we'd be in the position to give our child a stable and secure life. And so now that we felt nearly ready, it was still earlier than we had anticipated. We still weren't, I didn't have a job, a real job.
Right.
And
We owned a home though.
Yeah.
I had a degree. Like we had financial knowledge. Like I felt ready enough that we could figure it out, you know? And especially like I would compare our marriage and our family to other people who were able to have children so easily, which is so not the right thing to do.
Comparison is never good.
It's never good. But I would look at them and I'd be like, okay, they are making the most horrible decisions, but they got pregnant.
Right.
And they
we
didn't
would
want a
think,
baby.
why would this family be allowed to have a child at this time, and us, why can't we?
Do you remember what you told me? I remember we were driving home one day and I was so frustrated. I was like, this person didn't even want a baby and this and that and whatever. And you were like, something you need to remember is that maybe we can learn more by not having a child than by having a child right now. And we believe that this life is all about learning and growing.
100%. God puts us in situations for us to learn. And for us, you know, a child, we've still learned a lot and it's still been difficult, but there was a lot of learning that happened from struggling with fertility.
Right.
And just patience, being, you know, trusting of guidance and what God's promptings, even when we're not seeing the result that we thought we would see.
Right.
And, you know, even just, I'm now so much more sensitive to what other people may be going through. I had no idea what it would feel like. And I didn't even know anything about actually getting pregnant and the whole process. And now I've learned so much even about other things like IVF, where I could even be a resource, or at least someone to talk to someone going through those things, even though I didn't.
Right.
I at
it was
least
an
have
option
knowledge
on the table for us at one point. So you did have to learn those things. And I remember you told me like your dental hygienist recently was like going through that and was like, I'm 5 weeks pregnant, but like, I don't know if it's going to stick. And you were able to actually talk to her when like 3 or 5 years ago, you would have just been sitting there so awkward if someone was like,
oh, what is that?
You know? So yeah, let's pivot for a second because like chronologically, let's still talk about the time before we got pregnant. This is maybe a sensitive topic and I can totally edit this out if you're not willing to talk about it, but I'm interested in your perspective of how like trying to conceive impacted our intimacy and like our physical relationship.
It makes it worse.
That's the summary.
It turns romance into science.
Yeah. It's not fun all the time.
Yeah.
Especially when it's like, maybe you're sick.
Right.
Or maybe
it's like, today's the day. Like,
maybe
look
you
at the
just
calendar.
lost your job and maybe like it doesn't matter. Like you literally could have food poisoning, but if you're ovulating, you're freaking ovulating and the egg dies within 24 hours. And it's like, I don't care if you have food poisoning.
Yeah. It's like, it's crunch time.
It's like, and that puts so much pressure.
And it makes it not only less enjoyable, but like honestly, a little more difficult.
Oh yeah. It's horrible. I'm so glad that we're not trying to have a kid right now.
Yeah.
Because it's just so stressful. And like I said, it just consumes your every waking thought. And then it's just like every 4 weeks, it's the saddest day of your life all over again. When you take those tests, and which I took pregnancy tests every single month. I never waited to be late on my period because I knew that with how scientific we were being, I knew I could get a positive pregnancy test like
6 days,
like 8 to 9 days after I ovulated. And so I would be like, okay, I know I ovulated then. I want to find out immediately because I've been waiting for so long. And so then I would take the tests.
Like, it would be like 3 pregnancy tests a day for a week.
Because I was obsessed with this, you know?
It was a lot.
It was super, super unhealthy, but you know, that's just where we were at. And I remember like pretty early into us trying, it was like we started really trying in June. And then in November, my best friend got pregnant.
Right.
And like we weren't trying to get pregnant at the same time. It just casually happened that we both felt ready at the same time. So, you know, she was sending me her ovulation tests and I was sending her mine. And we were bonding over that. And then all of a sudden she got pregnant. And I was so happy for her.
Yeah.
But also,
and also
devastated.
sad for yourself.
I was devastated. Right? And that was super, super hard. And then like, you know, she went to her first ultrasound and she's like, how are your tests looking this month? And I'm like,
bad.
They're still negative. Like, and that just went on and on and on.
Went on for a year.
Yeah.
Until
June,
we went to Disneyland.
Yeah.
And what was it? The car ride there.
I felt a cramp and it was not time for me to have my period. And I had learned about something called implantation cramping, which is when the baby, essentially the tiny, tiny, tiny little speck of a baby, embeds itself into the lining of your uterus. And I was like,
so you might be able to feel that.
You might. For me, I am. And so when that happened, I knew that that could have been a day when I could be implanting, because it's so many days after, like there's so much science to it. When it happened, I knew. And I was like, that's what that was. But I didn't want to get my hopes up.
Right.
But I knew.
Mm-hmm.
And then
you were a bit nauseous.
I was like,
especially the car ride.
Oh my
home,
gosh,
the
car
drive
ride
home from Disneyland.
Like 4 or 5 days later, I'm starting to feel sick. I'm sweating profusely. I am so short of breath. Like I started having these weird symptoms and I was like, I bet you anything that I'm pregnant. And you started a new job.
I didn't really know yet either. I just thought you were car sick.
Yeah, which was probably true. So we came home and you started a new job that week, and I decided to take a pregnancy test. Well, first, all of the sudden I really wanted a smoothie. And I don't really want smoothies very often.
For breakfast.
Yeah, I made
like
a smoothie. Like I made, and that usually does not happen. So I made a smoothie and I was like, that's weird. And then I took a pregnancy test and it was positive. And it was the first time I had ever seen a positive pregnancy test, or even something that resembled
and
a positive test.
how many more did you take?
50. I took that day, I took like 6, because I was like, this has to be an evaporation line, which is essentially a false positive test. I remember I started shaking, first of all. Like I was shaking, my heart dropped into my stomach. Like it was crazy. And I was like, immediately I felt like I wasn't alone. Like I could feel that my body physically was not independent anymore, which is such a strange thing. But I'm like, I know there's like someone here. Like that's so crazy. I FaceTimed my best friend who was still pregnant at the time, and she started crying.
She was almost due.
She was like 7 months pregnant, I think. And she started crying on FaceTime, and she's like, does Scott know? I was hiding in our master bedroom closet. I was like, no, like he doesn't know yet. I just took these tests. And she's like, well, go tell him and then like call me back later. And
I was working.
You were working. You were on a meeting. And when we decided to start trying, I actually went to Target and I bought a little baby outfit because I assumed that it was going to be quick.
Yeah, a few months.
And I wanted to just have something to announce it to you whenever it happened. That way, if I took a test at 10 p.m., I could whip something together really quick, because you know I can't keep secrets from you. So I wouldn't be able to like wait. So I had this baby outfit hidden since like May of the previous year. It's like a whole year and a month later.
Yeah.
And so I put a little letter board together. I put out the pregnancy test. I put out the outfit, and then I got you. What was that like for you?
I came out. There was like your phone was set up, recording. There's the letterboard and outfit. It was honestly kind of jarring. Like I just came out of a work meeting.
I should have waited till after
work,
probably.
I read this letterboard and like I looked at the positive pregnancy tests. I honestly didn't really believe it.
Right. Even though one of them was digital and it said yes.
It literally said yes. There's like 6 positive pregnancy tests. And I was like, Like I was excited.
You gave me a big hug.
I gave you a big hug. I was very excited, but at the same time, it just because it had been so long, it was just weird. It wasn't as happy as it maybe should have been.
Right. Right. So we turned that emotion around really quick, and we got so excited. Like, because the test started getting darker.
Yeah. Within a month, we bought a crib.
We were crazy.
We bought a rocking chair. We
bought this pregnancy book.
We basically took, your office was in that bedroom.
Yeah.
We removed your office and turned that bedroom. We started creating a nursery.
Within like 2 weeks of knowing we were pregnant.
Yeah.
Because we had waited for so long.
And on top of that, we got gifts for all of our parents to announce to them that they were going to become grandparents.
We were the only children of theirs that were ever going to have kids at this point.
No other grandchildren.
Yeah.
And so we announced it to them, to family. We bought a bunch of things. And at 6 weeks, when is the first ultrasound?
8 weeks.
8 weeks. So there was a appointment before that where you took a pregnancy test
at the doctor.
Yeah,
and they did like blood work also.
Yeah, you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And then a little bit after that, 2 weeks later, the first ultrasound happens.
Right. And I had never had an ultrasound before.
Me neither.
Have you had one since?
No.
So at this ultrasound, you go in. And you got to be in there with me, which is good. And they like did the gel on my stomach and they were like looking all around and they were like, you're still a little bit too early for us to get like a good picture this way. So we're going to do a different type of ultrasound, which is more invasive.
Yeah, gets a little closer.
Gets a little uncomfy. So I had that type of ultrasound done. I don't know what I'm allowed to say where we won't, like, I don't.
That's enough. Yeah. You've already said enough. And what did they see?
Nothing.
Just an empty bag.
They saw the gestational sac, which is the bag that the baby would eventually go in. And they didn't see anything else. And they said, this is really consistent with like a 5-week pregnancy. Where we can't see what's called the fetal pole yet. And like, is it possible that you are like earlier than you thought? And I said, no, there is no way.
We knew exactly
the day
you were about to ovulate and when you had stopped ovulating. And those were only like 24 hours apart.
Right. And I also knew exactly when I implanted the moment. I knew the moment that it implanted. And so I knew that it wasn't early. And she said, okay, well, like, we're going to like have the doctor look at these results and then like go wait in the lobby and the doctor will come get you and talk to you afterwards. And I remember she left and we just hugged and I started crying because I knew at that point that it was over. It never had begun, essentially.
It was a miscarriage.
Yeah.
Right? It was a unsuccessful pregnancy.
So that appointment alone was really difficult for me because I'm crying and she printed out the ultrasound for us, I believe, that has nothing on it. And we're sitting in the lobby holding these ultrasound photos. My phone is blowing up with my best friend, my mom, your mom, everybody who's like, congrats on your ultrasound today. Like, have fun. Like, cause we told our close family, we didn't like put it on social media, but our closest people knew. And so my phone is blowing up. I'm sitting there, I'm crying in the lobby with pregnant women all around me. We get taken back into the room and they had like a congratulations pregnancy package bag gift thing.
And they were like, oh, oops. And put
they're
that
like,
away
let
into
me
a
put
drawer.
this mess away. And it's like, I knew what it was like. And then they just explained like, at this point, it looks like something called a blighted ovum based on what we told them was our timeline, which essentially means like the baby never developed at all. And they said, but, we need to really make sure. So come back next week because in early pregnancy, 7 days makes a huge difference. And you can see massive changes in a healthy pregnancy in just a 7-day period.
And so we scheduled a return appointment. We came back the next week.
I went alone.
Oh, you went alone? And this was the time you were alone and they did see
Something
that could have been construed as a fetal pull.
They did see a fetal pull.
They didn't pick up on a heartbeat.
Exactly. So they saw there was something in the sac this time, which meant I wasn't having a blighted ovum. There was a pregnancy.
Right.
And I remember I texted you because, I'm there at the ultrasound alone and now I have a baby in me all of a sudden. When the past week I'm like, there's nothing even in there.
It was confusing
yes,
for both of us.
And the doctor.
They're like, why didn't we see this last time?
The doctor said, this is extremely consistent with an early pregnancy. Are you sure that your dates are correct? Like, are you sure? Because at this point, we didn't see something last week. We are seeing something this week. At this rate, next week, we should see a heartbeat if this is a successful pregnancy. Like, are you sure? And I said, yes, I am sure.
And so they had us schedule
another ultrasound.
Did I go back with that next one?
Yes, because I was like, I need your support because today is the day that we're going to find out one way or another for sure. And if we are finding out that it's not good news, decisions need to be made about how to proceed. So I needed you there.
And so we went back the following week and it was the same as the previous week.
Right. And
it was even tricky for them to find that apparent fetal pull. And so we determined, and the doctor determined, right, that the baby was not alive or growing.
Right. And at this point, I should have been, I think, 11 weeks pregnant.
Yeah. Maybe 10.
I think
we had
11.
to schedule out a couple weeks for what came next, right?
I had it that Friday.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was that quick. So at this point, they determined that I lost the baby around 6 weeks. That's
Which
how
was
it was
the
measuring.
First ultrasound.
Right. So they said, like, you didn't ever progress much past that. So essentially you've been carrying something in there for like 5 weeks that's dead.
And it didn't come out naturally.
And I wasn't having cramps. I wasn't having any signs of a miscarriage. I was still having pregnancy symptoms.
Somewhat.
Yeah.
You weren't really nauseous.
I know. I got nauseous for a bit at the beginning and then it kind of started to drop off.
And we were like, oh, wow. Like, what a blessing. You're not going to be nauseous during your first trimester.
Right. And like, come to find out my hormones were dropping, but I was still like
a little bit.
I was a little bit
weird.
Nauseous. I was still having like sleeping problems and stuff. Like I didn't have any symptoms of what I thought a miscarriage would be like because I've heard they are horrific.
Yeah.
I didn't have bleeding.
And so the next step was, there were two options.
Yeah.
Right. Take a pill or a doctor puts you under and sucks it out and scrapes it out.
Yeah. And sorry to be
graphic
and direct, but this is what we like genuinely had to discuss and deal with.
We had to decide what.
This is the reality of it.
Is like, it'll probably work, but it might not. And if it doesn't, then you got to do option 2.
And if it does work, you have to deal with this at home and they won't give you pain medication and you're going to go through a miscarriage on just ibuprofen and Tylenol and you could hemorrhage at home. And if you bleed this much in this amount of time, you have to rush to the hospital.
Lots of details. So we decided to go with the surgical removal option, which was also terrible.
It was horrible because I had so much anxiety about the whole thing. I had so much anxiety about going under anesthesia.
Yeah, you were super scared and you hadn't been under general anesthesia before. There's a lot of problems, a lot going wrong. We were very sad on top of it all.
Yeah.
And we had a cruise scheduled for the next month.
Yeah, that was supposed to be our baby moon. We talked about this in our Get to Know Us episode, but we had a baby moon scheduled. This sounds so crazy because we like hadn't even had an ultrasound yet, but we were I cannot express in words how excited we were at this time.
And it was taken away.
It was taken away from us. And so I went to have this procedure done and it was difficult for a lot of reasons. I was separated from you for most of it. Like they took me back alone at first to give me an IV and stuff. I'm sitting there crying.
There were still COVID protocols going on, so I couldn't go back. It was a sad experience.
Yeah.
And
that's about it.
I don't know if we have to say much more about
it. I didn't have any issues. Like the process went smoothly as much as possible, but overall, it was a really hard thing to go through. And
so we came home. We weren't having a baby. We closed the door on that room.
We legitimately like closed it,
and we didn't open it for quite a while.
We stopped like going down that hallway.
Yeah.
Like it was really a sad time. And to make this whole thing harder on me, my best friend delivered her baby 2 days after I had the miscarriage.
Yeah.
And so I am bleeding. I am going through postpartum hormone changes, which they don't tell you will happen. But when you have a miscarriage, you experience postpartum as well. My boobs were going to fall off. They hurt so bad because of the hormones. My veins were blown in my arms, and I went to her house to hold her newborn baby.
It's awful. I declined. I was invited, and I said no.
Scott couldn't do it. And I couldn't do it either.
Yeah,
but
you were just more obligated to.
I had to. And that was the last time I saw her until her baby's blessing in November, because I couldn't. I wanted to be there for her, and I feel horribly about it now because I know how difficult postpartum is. I know how difficult a newborn is, but
Well, you were there for them in a way before they came home from the hospital. You did a lot of house prep. We gave them meals. We did an acceptable amount. It wasn't great.
No.
But we were not really capable of much more.
No, it was really hard to sit there with like legit my arms like bruised up from my medical abortion surgery that I had holding a newborn baby.
And so you were then unable to be pregnant until you ovulated again,
Right.
which could be between like 6 and 12 weeks.
Yeah, you don't really know what's going to happen.
And so we kind of didn't talk about it much until that point came. And then we had to decide, are we just going to get right back on things and start having a baby? And we had a pretty in-depth conversation about that.
I remember that we decided not to. We were like, this is horrible. Like, we need a break. And at this point, it was fall. And I believe we decided January. Is that?
Yeah, we were like, let's just table this until the new year.
Yeah.
We weren't going to use birth control.
Right. And we were just like, nothing has happened yet really successfully. So like, if something does happen, that's great. But I emotionally and mentally
We couldn't
can't track
everything
this.
And plan out things and do all the science. We decided to just live normally.
Yeah.
And we weren't expecting much. We were expecting to have to wait to start things back up again the following year.
Right. So that's how things were. And then in November, I remember I had previously called a fertility doctor before, and they had just gotten back to me that day, which is what prompted this conversation in November. And I was like, hey, this like IVF clinic who does like really in-depth fertility testing on both people called me back, and they have availability. Did you want to do that now, or do you want to maybe do it in the spring? Like if we still are needing it, they have the availability, and they are really hard to get into, which is why we even brought it up. And I remember you told me like, I don't want to do this. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, you don't want to have a kid? Like, I was confused because there was just the way that it was delivered. I was confused. And you said like, no, like my ideal situation is like, we don't try and we're able to be blessed with this child. But like, if we have to do this science and this trying in these doctor's appointments, I can't right now. Like, I cannot even fathom thinking about that right now. So I was like, okay, like, understood. I'll delete the voicemail from them. Like, I am pretty much on the same page. Like, I would have been willing to go to those doctor's appointments, but I definitely was not jazzed about it by any means. So then what happened?
Well, we had the conversation. It was nighttime. We were going to go to bed. And you thought, maybe I should take a pregnancy test.
And it wasn't that tone though in my mind.
Yeah.
It was like, take a pregnancy test. test. And I had no reason
And
to
you thought-
believe that I should need to take a pregnancy test. Like I wasn't having any sort of pregnancy symptoms.
And we hadn't tracked anything.
We hadn't tracked anything. I didn't even know when my period was supposed to come. I had no idea.
But you took the test.
I took the test and 2 lines were there. And I said, Scott.
And I looked at it.
And
I was like,
okay.
This probably isn't, this is probably a false positive.
Yep.
You're going to have the most hormones in your urine in the morning when you wake up.
Exactly.
So let's take a test in the morning.
Exactly. And I remember I was like laying there awake and I was like, Scott, are you awake? And you were like, yeah. And I said, am I pregnant? And you said, probably. You just went to sleep. But you were like, it was so...
I was mad about it.
Yeah.
It was because, mad at the situation. Like now, like of all times, now.
Like we just had this very emotional discussion about not having kids. And then my crazy self goes in there and is like, I'm going to just work us up a little bit more and start taking pregnancy tests in the middle of the night like a psycho. So the next morning I took another test. I took a regular and I took a digital, and the regular one showed 2 lines and the digital said no. And so we were like,
okay.
Okay.
We had to go to Walmart.
that was a different time.
Was a different
I
one?
just booked a blood test.
Oh, that's right.
At
a lab.
Yeah, at like a third party lab, I paid $45. I just got an HCG blood test and it came back that I was pregnant. And that was shocking.
It was weird. And so
The fear set in immediately
Exactly.
for me.
yeah, me too. It was all of a sudden the previous time we were so excited. And then this time
Dread.
it was like, oh no, like 6 more weeks and then we'll be depressed again.
It was like, how long do I have until I'm carrying around a corpse? Like that sounds dark because it was.
Yeah.
It was
that's how we
dark.
felt.
And so when you get pregnant, your HCG, which is your pregnancy hormone, is supposed to double every 48 hours. So what did I do?
You got multiple blood tests.
On Tuesday, I had a blood draw on this arm, Thursday on this arm, Saturday, like
And
every
we were
48
writing
hours.
the numbers down, as well as we have like notebook pages full of pregnancy tests
to
that are
see the
taped
line get
to
darker.
them. Yeah.
Like when I tell you that this was the most stressful experience of
unhealthy.
my life, it was like, and the numbers did double for the most part. Like
Yeah.
there were some times where it was like a little bit sketchy, but then I started having really severe pain.
Oh, you know what we forgot to mention?
What?
You had a smoothie.
I did. That morning,
You had a smoothie.
the morning that we had that conversation, like we had the conversation late at night, that morning I had another smoothie in the morning. And then we
Two
had,
smoothies
Yep.
for the entire year of, what was that, 2022?
yeah.
Those were the only 2 smoothies that were consumed in
Yep.
our household.
Yep. And then took the test that night. And so now we have this running joke of like, if I'm making a smoothie in the morning, we don't even need to buy a test. Like we just know. But so I started getting really severe pain, like all on my right side of my pelvis, down my back, and all the way down my leg. It was so bad that I was like crying, and it was so painful.
So we thought it could be ectopic pregnancy. We went to the emergency room. We sat there for 6+ hours. And
they did crazy ultrasounds on me.
A bunch of ultrasounds, and they were like, can't see anything.
Well, like what happened was they took me into a separate room to do the ultrasounds because they had to do another one of those really invasive ones. And it was like a specific ultrasound tech. And she was doing the ultrasound on me for like seriously an hour because they couldn't find my right ovary at all. And that's where all of my pain was.
Yeah.
And so they were like, we don't know, like,
It was, in the end, it was inconclusive.
it was inconclusive. And so then I just went back to my OB and they did an ultrasound, and the ultrasound was like consistent with an early pregnancy. There was no heartbeat yet, but that was correct for the timing. So I had that ultrasound, and then we went back at 8 weeks to have our regular first ultrasound, and there was a heartbeat.
Yeah. And
That
the
was
pain
crazy.
ended up probably just being...
It was really severe sciatica pain.
Yeah.
Shout out to Culture Chiropractic. They healed me.
Yeah. bones and joints were bad. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that was crazy. We were scared. Again, normal people probably would have been like, oh, do some yoga. We were like, emergency room now.
Now I owe Banner money for that. You know, it's like,
Right. We're racking up medical bills. We're racking up blood test bills.
my cortisol
And
levels, my stress
even
hormones are through the roof.
the money we spent on
Pregnancy
tests
tests.
was probably a lot.
Seriously, ridiculous. And like I
But a
say it's
time.
ridiculous now, but in the moment it
was rational
it was
to
rational
you.
because our baby had died. That's how
Yeah.
it felt. Some people, when they have an early miscarriage, they're just like, oh, I had a miscarriage. But for us, our child died.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just our child that died. It was the hope of becoming parents died.
Because it was the whole situation of hopelessness until the miracle happened, and then the miracle died.
It
So
was
it was
horrible.
double hopelessness.
I remember
from there
too,
on.
like when we found out that we were miscarrying, I was like crying on the couch to you, and I was like, I am mad at God. Do you remember me saying that?
Yeah.
Like I have not felt that before, and I have not felt that since. But it was like such strong emotions. And I remember I even texted my mom and I said, like, I've never felt pain and like a sense of loss this severe. And she was like, what? Like, not saying that it was irrational, but like, for those of you who know me, like I lost my dad when I was a kid. And I said, like, that doesn't hold a candle to this. Like, losing my dad was nothing compared to having this miscarriage, which like to some people may seem crazy, but that's how bad we wanted this child. So then to have a so far successful pregnancy,
Every week was, every 2 weeks we were going to the OB.
right? They did give us a lot of ultrasounds,
Got a few extra ultrasounds.
and check-ins and things like that.
But it was still stressful every single
Yep.
time. I kind of don't ever want to go back there again.
I know. They're fantastic. Like
They're
I don't,
great and wonderful people, and they're
Yeah.
so nice. It wasn't the people.
it was the place.
It was just our circumstance and our
And
emotions.
every single time we wouldn't have an ultrasound, but we would do like the Doppler instead. It was like, it took them, the
Yeah.
look on your face right now, I can tell, like, because when the baby is pretty small, it takes a while for them to find the heartbeat. So every single appointment, Scott and I are sitting there.
There's 60 seconds of no heartbeat, and we're listening to a Doppler, and
We're just
it's
staring
like,
at each
well,
other.
there's no heartbeat.
And we're just like holding our breath. And then finally the heartbeat comes in, and we just are like, oh, okay, we get one more week with her. Well,
Yeah.
it was a girl.
Yeah.
But that's how the whole thing went. And then like,
Until viability,
which was
where we loosened up a little bit.
a little bit. And when I could feel her move,
Yes.
that helped a lot. But then there were some times where she was facing the wrong way,
You
wrong
wouldn't
way.
feel her move for a day or day and a half.
So we would have to like poke her a bunch, and like
Yeah.
that was really
Put
stressful.
an ice pack on her to make her wiggle.
Yeah. And it was just like, she's probably so annoyed with me poking her all the time. But like, I was so scared. And then there was, do you remember your birthday dinner?
Oh, at my birthday dinner, you had like intense cramping.
Like the most severe cramps that I had ever. And I was 20 weeks pregnant. And
yeah, I was so nervous. You were in the bathroom for a while. I was just sitting at the table eating my lobster. And
I went to the bathroom to check if I was bleeding. That's how bad the cramps were. And
you came back. We were just stressed the whole time. I'm sure we could think of 80 more examples, specific times when we thought that we lost the baby.
yeah, like
And
every day.
That
every
just
day.
goes to show how on edge we were. We were not able to enjoy the pregnancy, and I felt I couldn't even let myself think that we would have a baby because of, it was a defense, right? Because of fear of getting hurt so much more the entire time I just expected another miscarriage, and it was just really sad.
It was really sad. Another thing that made it really sad for me was the lack of understanding in the people around us, because which was shocking for me, because a lot of the people around us either had dealt with something similar or they know somebody who had dealt with something similar. But because of that, I think it made it less important, because 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in a miscarriage. And when we sort of announced to our close family and friends that we had had a miscarriage, so many people said, me too. Like, I had one before, I've had 3 before, whatever it is, my sister had one, my mom had 2, like so many people. But in a way that I felt that was like discounting my experience, and everybody was like, well, at least you know that you can get pregnant.
Right.
Or like your mom specifically was like, well, everybody loses their first pregnancy. And then after that, your body knows what it's doing. So you'll get pregnant again and like, it'll be fine. And it was just those comments that just made me feel small and made the situation feel small. So then when we did have a pregnancy that was going well on paper for the most part, there was like a few bumps in the road, but nothing severe. I felt like the only person that understood my anxiety or my stress was you. And I'm grateful that you were there through it all. But I wish that you and I had a larger support system that was a little bit more understanding of how hard the good pregnancy was, because I felt so guilty too.
Yeah. It's like, I should be excited to have this baby. I wish I could connect with this baby.
I felt so disconnected. And that furthered my whole thing of like, I'm not meant to be a mom. I was not confident that I was supposed to be a mom until she was like 2 weeks old.
Yeah.
Then I was like, once my hormones leveled out a little bit, I'm like, oh, I'm good at this. Like, she likes me and I like her, but like, I couldn't connect with her because she was just going to die. Yeah. And then, it was just like, I feel that so many people think of infertility problems as getting solved by having a child or having a successful pregnancy, but it is still difficult.
It makes the successful pregnancy harder.
It does. And like, nothing will ever replace our first pregnancy.
Yeah. And also, I don't think there will ever be a pregnancy, if we do decide to have more kids, where I'm not racked with anxiety. Especially
in a way, even more now, because we have had a daughter. We know what an early pregnancy can turn into. I have those early ultrasound photos of Brooklyn as a tiny little lima bean, and now she's this beautiful human who's learning and growing.
We have more of an understanding of what we're missing out on.
And what we have lost.
And what we've lost already.
It's super difficult.
So is there any advice that you would give to either help someone get through this themselves or for someone to, be a comfort or an aid to someone else who's going through this?
It's a really good question. I think that something that comes to mind is to remember the dads, because there were a lot of people who did reach out to me and offer condolences or offer to bring me lunch or whatever. And just because it happened in my body doesn't mean that you didn't lose something too. And in a way, like, discounting the experience of the dad discounts the experience of the family. Like, if you know somebody who's going through something like that and you're only giving the mom comfort, it almost makes it seem like the family didn't lose something. It seems like it's just like a sickness that the mom had, or you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
So I would recommend that.
Yeah, both parents are experiencing a difficulty.
Yeah. And I think understanding that maybe this is for advice for comforting people. Maybe they want space, and that space may include if you're having a baby or a pregnancy or are trying to conceive, they may want space from hearing about that or being directly involved in that. And I would say most people would be very comfortable with an invitation. Like, let's say it's your friend's like baby's birthday party. Like, I would have still appreciated getting invited to a birthday party for my friend's kid when I was going through this. But I would have appreciated more of like, I know that you're going through something that is like profoundly difficult, and I don't want you to do something that makes you grieve harder or is, you know, I would have appreciated like having that space from certain things. So I think that offering that space would be really, really beneficial to somebody. As for how to get through it, I don't know.
I don't know how we got through it.
I think that for the most part, we prayed a lot. We we turned to God for comfort. Yeah, I would say that like, if you are a religious person, going there would be helpful. I would say that our coping mechanism of like turning the next pregnancy into a science experiment with all the blood tests and everything was not healthy. And it's not something I would recommend.
Me neither.
By any means. I think that something that did help me in my successful pregnancy was, I don't know if you remember me saying this, but like before 24 weeks or whatever the age of viability is, if something goes wrong, you can't fix it. Yeah. So if it's going to go wrong, that's it.
Let go.
Let go.
You're not in control and you can't be.
Let go of your responsibility, because I felt like I had a responsibility to maintain this pregnancy because I had felt like my body failed. Right? So learning more about the age of viability and knowing before this time, if the baby is born, they cannot survive. Even if they are healthy, they cannot survive if they are under this many weeks old. After that point, I did feel a greater sense of responsibility to make sure that she was moving as much as she needed to, and like, you know, really keep on top of making sure that she was healthy and okay, because if she was born, something could be done. But letting go in those early days of knowing, what would anybody do if we found out something is wrong? That helped me. It was dark, but it helped me to relieve myself of that responsibility, because I don't know why we had a miscarriage.
Yeah.
We don't know
a reason that any doctor found.
No. And so trying to relieve yourself of that responsibility is really important, because like I said, 1 in 4 pregnancies do end in miscarriage in the United States last year is what the statistics are showing. And there's probably not like an easily identifiable reason for each and every one of those things. Sometimes DNA just doesn't connect properly, you know?
Yeah.
And there's nothing that you can do about it. It's like drinking one less Dr. Pepper isn't going to change anything, or like, you know, so just knowing that it most likely isn't your fault could help get through it as well.
Yeah.
As a dad, what advice do you have for dads going through a miscarriage?
It's really tough. For me, I like to usually look for a bright side. And the bright side sucks on this one. but the bright side is you've probably gained more patience, or the ability for more compassion and sympathy for others who are going through difficult things. And so you've learned, you've grown, and you might not have kids.
Yeah.
But you have grown. I also think for us, because we did have a child, we have a baby now, we cherish her extremely.
We do.
She is a prize, a reward, right? A very special person who we went through a lot of really nasty things to get here to this point. And so that's, I guess, a plus side.
Yeah.
I also wanted to give advice. For me, the best thing you could do for me if I was going through that again is DoorDash coupons, or
Seriously.
not coupons, but gift cards.
Seriously. Yes, that is a fantastic piece of advice. And I would say that goes for any type of loss or sickness or anything. If you don't know how to help a friend, DoorDash, Uber Eats, or just drop off a meal.
Drop off food.
And don't expect to come in.
Mm-hmm.
Don't expect to be a part of that.
Knock on the door and leave.
Even better, send a text.
Yeah.
Say, I left food at your door.
Love you.
Don't feel the need to reply if you don't feel comfortable replying right now. You know, it's such a hard thing, and it's such a hard thing that so many people are experiencing.
Yeah.
And that hurts my heart, but you can get through it.
You'll have to get through it. Time passes, and we can't stop that.
Well, that scares me.
Time passes. And on that note,
that's it.
Thanks for listening. Hopefully you've maybe learned something from this, or if you feel sorry for us and you want to send us a gift, that's fine. Go ahead.
I am dairy free at this time, so don't send anything too delicious.
Yeah. Or do, and then it'll just be all mine.
Whatever.
Thank you for listening. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode.
Do you have a love story worth sharing? Head to eternalcompanionspodcast.com to be a guest on our show.
And don't forget to check out the show notes.
See you next week.